Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of knowledge and weary minds about to drift into rest, let us turn our gaze backward through the corridors of history. For every achievement, every shining moment of progress has been shadowed by the same question: what if it had gone wrong? The Roman Empire, with its roads, its aqueducts, and its dreams of eternity, believed it could never fall. Yet one miscalculation at the edges of its borders, one failure to adapt, and centuries of order dissolved into chaos. Was this the worst-case scenario, or simply the natural shifting of time's tide? The voyages of discovery, when wooden ships carried men across vast oceans, promised riches, knowledge, and contact with distant worlds. But what if storms had lasted longer? What if supplies had failed? Or what if fragile alliances had turned into wars sooner? For many who set sail, the worst case was never returning home. And yet from those risks, a new map of the world was drawn. In the modern age, industry roared and machines reshaped societies. But progress, as history reminds us, carries its double edge. The same factories that lifted people from poverty also darkened skies with smoke. The same discoveries that cured diseases also built weapons with terrifying power. Humanity has always asked, what is the price of advancement? And still, the worst-case scenario is rarely what we imagine. History teaches us that collapse, revolution, and disaster are often born not from sudden catastrophe, but from long neglect, the ignored warning, the unheeded signal, the quiet erosion of stability. Listeners and dreamers, let us step together into the vast corridors of time. Tonight, in this quiet moment, we explore history through the lens of an ever-haunting question. What's the worst-case scenario? History is not simply a record of events. It is a living atlas, a map of choices, failures, recoveries, and transformations. Each page reminds us that what is gained can also be lost, and that what is feared often arrives not as a sudden blow, but as a long shadow creeping slowly across the land. As you settle into rest, let us wander gently through this atlas of human experience, pausing at turning points, imagining what could have been, and asking ourselves, when civilizations faced their darkest hours, was that truly the worst case? Or just another step in the unbroken rhythm of time? We begin with Rome, the empire of roads, legions, and marble triumphs. To its citizens, Rome seemed eternal. Its laws reached far, its armies further, and its culture stretched across continents. But Rome carried within it the seeds of decline. Borders grew too long to defend, wealth too unevenly spread, politics too bitterly divided. When Germanic tribes pressed against its edges, when economic strains hollowed its core, collapse was not a sudden storm, but a slow unraveling. Now we ask, what was the worst-case scenario? Was it the fall of Rome, or the centuries of fragmentation that followed, the so-called Dark Ages? Perhaps not, for while Rome's order ended, Europe gave birth to new kingdoms, new languages, and eventually new renaissances. The 15th and 16th centuries brought wooden ships against uncharted seas. Mariners like Columbus, da Gama, and Magellan pushed into the unknown with more faith than certainty. For them, the worst-case scenario was ever present. Storms could swallow fleets, starvation could claim crews, or hostile encounters could end journeys before they began. And yet, for those who reached new lands, Discovery carried both promise and peril. For indigenous peoples across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, contact with Europe brought disease, colonization, and upheaval, outcomes far closer to the worst-case scenario than explorers themselves ever imagined. Here, history reminds us, one group's triumph may be another's disaster. Worst cases are not universal. They are lived differently, depending on where you stand. Fast forward to the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution reshaped the world at a speed unmatched before. Machines roared, cities swelled, and coal smoke filled the skies. For workers, the promise of steady wages was balanced against brutal conditions, child labor, and polluted air. The worst-case scenario, some feared, was that mechanization would erase humanity itself, reducing people to mere cogs in the machines they built. Others feared unchecked exploitation of nature would one day render the earth unlivable. Though industry lifted millions from poverty, it also birthed weapons of mass destruction and entrenched inequalities. The lesson, the line between progress and catastrophe, is thin, and humanity often walks it unaware. The 20th century was a stage for some of history's darkest hours. 2 world wars scarred the planet, leaving cities in ruins and generations in grief. For those who lived through them, the worst-case scenario was real. Famine, displacement, the collapse of order, and the loss of millions of lives. In the Second World War, the Holocaust revealed humanity's capacity for cruelty at an almost unimaginable scale. In 1945, atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, showing the world a new and terrifying possibility, that one decision, one weapon, could end civilization itself. And yet, even in these shadows, there are glimmers of renewal. Nations rebuilt, international institutions were founded, and voices rose calling for peace, rights, and justice. Once again, we see that even when history stumbles into catastrophe, it does not end. It changes. History teaches us that true disaster is often not a sudden explosion, but a long neglect. The fall of empires, the collapse of economies, the breakdown of societies, these usually stem from ignored warnings. Crops fail, leaders quarrel, resources dwindle, and yet those in power carry on blind to the coming storm. The Maya built magnificent cities, but when droughts strained their agriculture, their world fractured. The Easter Islanders carved giant statues, but cut down the forests that sustained them. For them, the worst case was not war or conquest, but silence. The silence of a society that could no longer sustain itself. These stories remind us, the worst case is not always sudden. Sometimes it is the quiet unraveling of systems we thought eternal. Today, we live in a world more connected, more technologically advanced, and more fragile than ever before. Our global atlas is filled with risks: climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, and nuclear weapons. Today, we live in a world more connected, more technologically advanced, and more fragile than ever before. Our global atlas is filled with risks: climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, and nuclear weapons. Each carries its own possible worst-case scenario: rising seas swallowing coastal cities, viruses moving faster than medicine, digital attacks disabling entire nations, miscalculated conflicts escalating into nuclear war. Yet just as in the past, history whispers, worst cases are not certainties. They are warnings, and warnings are only wasted when ignored. But history is not merely a catalog of disasters. It is also a record of resilience. Humanity has survived plagues, famines, invasions, and collapses. Each time, people rebuilt. Each time, new cultures, new ideas, and new futures emerged. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed much of the city, yet from the ashes rose a modern metropolis. The Black Death devastated Europe, yet it also transformed economies and societies in ways that paved the way for renewal. The worst-case scenario, then, is not simply destruction. It is destruction without rebirth. And so far, humanity has always found a way to rise again. As you rest tonight, consider this. The purpose of history is not to frighten us with worst-case scenarios. It is to remind us that fragility and resilience walk in hand, that civilizations may fall, but humanity endures, that disasters arrive, but recovery follows. In Rome's ruins, in London's ashes, in Hiroshima's shadows, the story of endurance continues. Each generation inherits both the risks and the lessons of the past. So the true worst-case scenario is not collapse, it is forgetting. Forgetting what brought others down. Forgetting the warnings left in ruins, texts, and memories. Forgetting that we too are fragile, but also strong. Beyond Rome, there were countless civilizations that seemed unshakable in their time. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Persians, the Khmer, the Olmec, the Inca, each believed in some way in permanence. Each built monuments, temples, and records meant to outlast the centuries. And yet time proved otherwise. Take the ancient city of Ur, once a thriving hub in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. It flourished with irrigation canals, temples to the gods, and bustling markets. But shifts in rivers, changes in climate, and the slow salinization of the soil brought decline. The worst case for them was not sudden conquest, but silence. The slow desertification of fertile land and the eventual abandonment of once vital cities. Or consider the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia, builders of Angkor Wat. For centuries, they created wonders, aligning their temples with the stars and sustaining vast populations with sophisticated water systems. But when droughts came, followed by floods, the delicate balance of their society fractured. Their worst case was not invasion, but nature itself.